Hi everybody and welcome back to another video. Ever since audio manufacturers started combining a desktop DAC with a desktop headphone amplifier, they started calling them as all-in-one units. A few years later, they started adding some additional features like a preamp, like Bluetooth capabilities, and again calling such units as all-in-one units. But in truth, you still needed a source to feed the internal DAC of such devices, as a laptop, as a desktop PC, a smartphone, so those weren't really all-in-one devices. FiiO understood that, and they even asked me several questions what would be a true all-in-one device, and I replied that room integration and offline music player and some online streaming services would be pretty much mandatory, and they came up with this puppy which is called FiiO R7, and let's check what's the fuss about it. Design-wise, it looks weird at first, like an oversized digital audio player with a huge power supply and amp stages glued to its back, but after close inspection it's much more complex than that. So it's made out of metal, it has tempered glass on its front, it has aluminum volume wheels right here, it has honeycomb patterns on its sides that will help with heat dissipation, and this is all you need to know about its build quality. When it comes to controls, you'll find a 4-pin XLR headphone jack, 4.4 balanced connector, a 1/4-inch headphone jack, you have a massive 5-inch HD display, you have a volume wheel which also doubles as an on-off button, and you have an output selector right here. On its back it gets way more complicated. You can use its built-in power supply and power it with the included AC cable, or you can go with a more premium linear and regulated power supply, which is called PL50, which will improve its sound quality, but more about that in a minute. You have an USB-C input, an SD card slot for offline music listening, optical and coaxial inputs and outputs, including an Ethernet port. It has variable or fixed RCA and XLR outputs, so you can use it as a pure DAC or as a DAC and preamp combo, if you will. You can even hook it up to an external DAC with that USB host feature, using it as a transport or streamer, and you can see a beefy Bluetooth and Wi-Fi antenna at the top. This thing is so far the most feature-packed FiiO unit to date, and probably the most feature-packed unit full stop, because I never saw so many things added inside. So it can work as a DAC, as a preamp, as a headphone amplifier, as a Bluetooth receiver, as an offline music player, as an online music player, streaming services, room endpoint, and everything really combined, so you can mix and match. This thing has endless possibilities. When it comes to components, they went with a single ES9068 DAC chip, which includes an MQA decoder in the same silicon. They went with two THX AAA 788 Plus headphone amplifier modules, which are providing up to 3.6 watts of power per channel, which makes it the most powerful FiiO unit to date, outperforming their K9 Pro by a substantial amount. MQA is on board, Bluetooth is on board, it's room enabled via Wi-Fi and Ethernet, and since it looks like a portable DAP was slapped to its front panel, the whole thing is being controlled by a Snapdragon 660 CPU, 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of ROM memory are being provided, and an unlocked version of Android 10.0 lets you install any third-party app you can possibly desire, including streaming apps, browsers, YouTube, games, and many more. For additional specs, please head over to FiiO's website, as I'll be hitting some eardrums and I'll tell you how it sounds. Sound-wise, let's talk about its digital inputs first, because I feel there is actually quite a difference between them. And the first was USB-C with my Windows machine, which worked flawlessly. I had no issues. There was a perfect sync, lip sync with my videos. It was flawless, so I had no hiccups, really no complaints using it as a USB DAC with my Windows machine. Even watching videos, playing games, all that worked actually amazing. Then I moved to its offline music player and online streaming services, bypassing my PC and Windows operating system, and there was actually a small difference in terms of transparency because it was slightly cleaner sounding. There was less ringing in the treble, so it was slightly more natural sounding as well, and I felt that pretty easily, not only with IEMs, but especially with desktop headphones. Then I moved to Roon together with my Roon Nucleus, and I really don't know what mumbo jumbo is happening, but there was actually a bigger difference. So it sounded the best as a Roon endpoint, wireless or wired with that Ethernet connection. It sounded just amazing, more natural, more impactful, more vivid. It was a joy to listen to via Roon. And if I would rank all its digital inputs and working modes, then I would say that it sounded the best via Roon, followed by its offline music player, then by online music services, then by USB, and finally the last ones would be optical and coaxial, which worked great but didn't sound the best with this one. And then there was a much bigger difference, a substantial difference, and that was by bypassing its internal switching mode power supply with an external linear and regulated power supply, which is made by FiiO and is called PL50. So I'll be honest with you, in its stock configuration with its internal switching mode power supply, I felt that it was on the brighter side, let's say so. It was too linear for my taste. There was no weight to the bass. It felt quite ethereal in the bass, and there was no bass slam whatsoever, even on its highest gain with some planar magnetic headphones. It was not very engaging, and it was too ethereal. It was lacking cojones. It was not engaging or lively sounding with its internal switching mode power supply. But when I switched to this puppy, there was actually quite a big difference, especially in the bass slam, bass texture, bass weight, everything that has to do with bass felt livelier with this one, especially via desktop headphones. Mid-range was a little fuller bodied. I felt that the voices was vibrating a little longer, so I had a better pitch with voices. The mid-range was actually fuller bodied, so it was better. The soundstage wasn't bigger, but transparency improved. There was less ringing in the treble, and I could look much easier into those background notes, so it felt a little clearer sounding in a way. And there was less treble itch, treble glare, and it felt more natural, so I could listen to those treble interested tracks much better with its linear power supply, and it was quite itchy. It was there was some glare on its stock power supply, so it was quite a substantial difference. But I felt that mostly with desktop headphones and not as much with IEMs. There was a difference, but it was a much bigger one with desktop headphones. If you ever tried their K9 Pro ESS or M17 digital audio player, then this one sounds very, very similar in terms of tonality. So it's linear, it's neutral, it doesn't try to interfere with the frequency response, it's not dropping or elevating anything, so it's a straight line in terms of frequency response. It's very linear, it's clear sounding, it's transparent sounding, it's detailed sounding, and it worked better with warm or neutral headphones, and it didn't work that great with bright sounding headphones. So in my case, it worked absolutely excellent with Meze Elite, with Odyssey LCD5, Odyssey LCD4, with RZH Phobos, with Kenneth and Rogner, and it didn't work that great with some bright tilted headphones. When it comes to dynamics or transients as a whole, it really depends on what power supply you'll be using. With the stock one switching mode power supply, it was lightning fast, it was very snappy sounding with everything really, but it added weight, muscle mass and punch and bass slam only with that PL50 power supply, especially with desktop headphones. It wasn't really a big difference with IEMs or easy to drive headphones, but with heavier to drive desktop headphones, especially with planar magnetics, there was a massive difference in terms of bass slam. So if you want to make it punchy, visceral, then you know what you need to do, because that PL50 is not as expensive, and I believe it's a must-have upgrade if you want to make it visceral sounding. And considering that this is also the most powerful FiiO unit to date, providing 3.6 watts of power, you can be sure that it has an excellent control over those headphone drivers, and it will get visceral sounding with the right selection of music. Power-wise, 5 gain modes are being provided, but since I mostly played with planar magnetic and inefficient headphones, I went directly to ultra high gain setting, which worked amazing with any of these. And long story short, regardless of what headphones I was using, be it Meze Elite, Odyssey LCD4, LCD5, Heritage Phobos, many other headphones, it worked really amazing. It had a very good control over the drivers. It never felt out of breath, even on some complex music with some high dynamic range tracks. I moved to high gain, and that is the third gain position on some dynamic headphones like those from APOS, Kenerton, RZH, and again, there was enough power, too much power on top of those headphones. To my surprise, even HiFi Soundbar worked decently with this one, especially with that PL50 power supply. It didn't work that great as high-end and ultra-high-end amplifiers, but I would say that at around 75%, maybe 78% of what Soundbar is capable of, I've heard on this puppy right here together with the PL50 power supply, which is actually quite amazing. But Soundbar definitely sounded better on this puppy right here with the PL50 versus that K9 Pro ESS DAC I'm combo. Checking out its noise floor, I don't know what ritual dances FiiO engineers did around it when designing this one, because regardless of the headphone jack, regardless of the volume level, it was pretty much noiseless with a bunch of IEMs as long as I stayed on its low, mid or high gain. When I moved to super high and ultra high gain, there was a white noise, a faint noise appearing in the background, and it was not increasing or decreasing depending on the volume. So clearly those two were made for desktop headphones, which mind you didn't show that white noise with these ones. So while on paper it has a slightly higher noise floor of 7.5 microvolts versus 5 microvolts on K9 Pro, they both perform pretty much the same as long as I stayed on that low, mid or high gain, and I believe this is a very IEM friendly unit. Detail retrieval is another highlight of R7, and it's probably the biggest highlight of its bigger brothers like K9 Pro, M17, Q7, so this one will not disappoint in this regard. Although it's not as clean and transparent like those devices, you can improve this one by using it as a Roon endpoint with streaming services, by using that PL50 power supply, which will improve its focus and will improve its cleanness and its dynamic range on the macro and micro scale. So you can improve this one pretty easily, and please don't worry about that because it's still a very resolving and clean sounding unit. I mean, it's still being powered by an ESS Sabre DAC, and it has two THX AAA modules, which were literally made for detail retrieval, for noiseless performance, for high dynamic range tracks. So this is literally the strongest skill of R7 as of yet. Stage size was again playing some tricks on me, especially when I was swapping those power supplies. So PL50 didn't increase the scale per se, but there was less smearing, less grain, less veil, and I could easier focus on the things playing in the background, and that somehow improved the perception of air traveling around my tracks. So again, that PL50 seems like a no-brainer upgrade for R7, not only because it improves dynamics and injects some naturalness, but because it offers a better focus and a better stereo image. So in terms of soundstage, this one performs pretty much similarly like their K9 Pro, M17, Q7, and for me that's more than enough. For a bigger soundstage, you'll need to invest in a fully Class A headphone amplifier or in a tube amplifier, which will be pushing the sounds farther away from you. Moving on to frequency response, R7 won't impress a bass head in its stock form, getting super technical, clean and fast in terms of bass, but not as punchy, deep-reaching, or just very powerful in the bass. But add that PL50 power supply and it gets a 180-degree turn in terms of bass performance, getting much punchier, much deeper, much more textured, and just a much better bass altogether. Mid-range felt mostly linear sounding, but after playing with multi-thousand R2R DACs and FPGA DACs, it feels that some life was lost in Transients FiiO R7, and for this reason I again recommend that PL50 power supply and rule integration, which will be bringing more life and more warmth to its mid-range, ultimately making it more fun and more engaging sounding. It was a little dry and it was a little thin sounding in its stock form, but not anymore with that upgraded power supply, and you should expect a linear mid-range that doesn't want to beautify your music in any way. Its trebles were strong, maybe too strong in the first hours of use, but after 2 days of burning, I felt that some glare and some listening fatigue went down. If you want to completely remove that, then again, nothing does it better than that PL50 power supply. I don't remember for how many times I recommended that to you. It's a must-have upgrade for this one, not only in terms of bass and mid-range, but also in terms of treble, and not only for this one, but also for their Q7 and M17 digital audio player. As for my conclusions, I didn't experience a more feature-packed unit as of yet, and if there would be a definition of an all-in-one device that doesn't need additional electronics to function properly, then R7 would fit that description very, very well. It worked flawlessly via Roon, it had a very strong Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection, and it always moved and behaved like a modern smartphone. It had all the power that you can possibly desire for desktop headphones. It was noiseless with IEMs, and they went with a dead neutral tuning, leaning towards linearity rather than warmth or brightness. And considering its amazing feature set and very small footprint, I'll gladly recommend it to you, and I'll honor it with my highest gold award. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as usual, be positive in everything, and I'll see you around.